It's Friday, it's 12:15, and this is Politics UK. Welcome to your weekly roundup of parliamentary highlights from across the UK. I'll be joined by colleagues in Edinburgh, Cardiff and Belfast, and here in Westminster by our parliamentary correspondent, Sean Curran. This week, is enough being done to tackle the new Omicron variant of COVID-19?
It's best to act decisively and swiftly when we see a potential threat, which is why we're building our defences.
Will the Secretary of State extend the use of masks to hospitality, or does COVID not spread in pubs?
And at PMQs...
Was a Christmas party thrown in Downing Street for dozens of people on December the 18th?
What I can tell the right honourable gentleman is that all guidance was followed completely.
The SNP tries to use parliamentary rules to cut the Prime Minister's pay.
The Prime Minister has been up to his neck in scandals. Cash for honours, cash for contracts, PECs for tax breaks.
The SNP motion today is pitiful politically.
And the SNP's digital conference hears that a referendum is on the way.
The campaign to persuade a majority of people in Scotland that our future will be more secure as an independent nation will resume in earnest.
Welcome. Let's start here in Westminster with our parliamentary correspondent, Sean Curran. Sean, as we heard there in the headlines, there's been a lot of debate about how best the government should respond to the new Omicron variant. How did the week unfold?
Well, at the start of the week, the Health Secretary, Sajid Javid, came to the Commons to announce a series of measures which the government hopes will halt the spread of this new variant. And it meant there would be some changes to the rules in England. So, for example, there's a tightening up of the self-isolation rules. Anybody who comes into contact with somebody who's got a case of this new variant will have to self-isolate even if they've been vaccinated. And there's the reintroduction of compulsory masks in some public places. As well as that, he announced there would be changes to the booster programme. In other words, people would get it quicker and more people would be eligible. And he was announcing all of this in advance of the regulations changing a few hours later.
Our experience of fighting this virus has shown us that it's best to act decisively and swiftly when we see a potential threat, which is why we're building our defences and putting these measures in place without delay. Scientists are working at speed, at home and abroad, to determine whether this variant is more dangerous. And I can assure the House that if it emerges that this variant is no more dangerous than the Delta variant, then we won't keep measures in place for a day longer than necessary.
We support the decision to introduce masks on public transport and in shops. But we believe this should never have been abandoned in the first place. Keeping masks in place would always have been our plan A. Will the Secretary of State extend the use of masks to hospitality and other settings? Or does COVID not spread in pubs?
Will my right honourable friend avoid taking any panic measures if we see a rise in infections during the weeks ahead, as seems inevitable, and concentrate instead on the vaccine's effectiveness against severe illness and hospitalisation?
My right honourable friend is absolutely right that what matters as we look ahead around this new variant is what matters more than anything is hospitalisations.
Sean, we heard some unease there amongst Conservative backbenchers about the impact of the new COVID rules that you talked about, the tightening up of some restrictions. Now, there was a particular row this week about some comments from one senior official, Dr Jenny Harries. What happened?
Yes, well, Greg Clark, who we've just heard there, I would say he's at the milder end of concern. And so he was speaking when Sajid Javid came to the Commons on Monday. The next day, Tuesday, was when MPs got the chance to debate and vote on the regulations. Now, some of them were pretty cross because by the time they got to debate, these new rules, they were already in force. But what added to their anger were these comments from Dr. Jenny Harris, who is a public health official. She's the head of the UK Health Security Agency. And in an interview, she had said that people should not socialise unnecessarily at Christmas. And she had implied, she hadn't said this explicitly, but she'd implied that people in England should think about working from home. It's already the case in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland that people are working from home. And so Conservative MPs, who were already, some of them, pretty angry about these new regulations, not at all happy at the way it was all being scheduled in Parliament, particularly not happy about the fact that the regulations will expire once Parliament had started its Christmas break, they had a new complaint to put to the Minister, Maggie Throup.
In September, the government set out its autumn and winter plan for fighting the virus, which could be implemented to ensure the NHS is not overwhelmed. While we are not implementing the entirety of the plan now, we are taking steps to respond to a potentially potent mutation of the virus.
Will she deprecate those public appointees who, notwithstanding the clear proportionate advice of the Chief Scientific Advisor, have been out on the airwaves telling people that they shouldn't socialise, to the huge detriment of people's well-being and an industry struggling to recover from earlier lockdowns?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm sure the people he's referring to will have heard him very loud and clear. We all do enjoy socialising, but as my rational friends will appreciate, that we are in a difficult situation at the moment, but we have personal responsibility as well.
Dr. Harris said two things this morning. She said people shouldn't socialise, and she also implied, to be fair, only implied that people should work from home. Now, the Prime Minister was asked about this and made it very clear that was not the government's position and that people should follow the advice. I listened carefully to what the Minister said. I don't think that's quite what she said. Could she be clear that Dr. Harris was only speaking for herself? She was not speaking for the government.
Dr. Harris is a health professional. She's a public health professional and therefore really does understand what public health measures need to be taken to secure our well-being against this pandemic. So why isn't the government listening to what public health professionals are advising?
Is she seriously saying that it's not for ministers to have any particular view on officials employed within the department going out and taking a position which is at odds with the government's public policy position? Because if that really is now the policy that we've got, that even employees of departments can take their own personal positions, we really are facing chaos and an overturning of long-standing government principles.
One of the major problems being faced by GPs in my constituency of St Albans is that some people are refusing to wear masks because they quote that the Prime Minister didn't have to when he went to a hospital. So could I ask the Minister how she intends to lead by example when half of her own colleagues are still refusing to wear masks on the benches opposite?
It is right to reintroduce masks on public transport, in shops and other settings, including banks, hairdressers and post offices, for those who aren't exempt. This is a measure that should never have been abandoned, and whilst mask wearing in public spaces forms part of the government's Plan B, it was always on our bench as part of our Plan A rather than an emergency measure.
While mask wearing wasn't mandatory in England, it still remained in the guidance of this government, if in a busy public space. And I'm sorry, I have to say that that guidance has been undermined by the demonstration on television every day of members on the government benches. As for the nonsensical claim by the Leader of the House that you cannot catch COVID from your friends, I have to say words fail me.
Well, some Conservative MPs at the end of that debate voted against the regulations, but as we heard, the opposition parties were supporting, and so actually the new rules passed with an overwhelming majority.
I mean, Sean, on Wednesday, of course, we had Prime Minister's questions where coronavirus was, again, a major issue. But the Labour leader, Keir Starmer, wanted to focus on reports of a party in Downing Street last Christmas and allegations that it broke the COVID rules that were in place at the time, socialising being off limits. What happened?
Yes, so Wednesday, 1st of December, the moment you can open the first window on your advent calendar. So imagine Keir Starmer's delight when he opens the window and instead of finding a chocolate, there's a headline on the front page of the Daily Mirror saying that there'd been a breach of the lockdown rules in Downing Street last Christmas. And so he tried to combine a couple of issues in Prime Minister's questions, but he led off with this allegation that there had been parties in Downing Street when the rest of the country was in a very tight lockdown. And he was really, I suppose, trying to summon up the ghosts of Christmas past to haunt Boris Johnson.
As millions of people were locked down last year, was a Christmas party thrown in Downing Street for dozens of people on December the 18th?
Prime Minister!
Mr. Speaker, what I can tell the right honourable gentleman is that all guidance was followed completely during number 10. And can I recommend to the right honourable gentleman that he does the same with his own Christmas party, which he's advertised for December the 15th, to which unaccountably he's failed to invite the deputy leader, Mr. Speaker.
Keir Starmer.
Nice try, but that won't work. Does the Prime Minister really expect the country to believe that while people were banned from seeing their loved ones at Christmas last year, it was fine for him and his friends to throw a boozy party in Downing Street?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I've said what I've said about number 10 and the events of 12 months ago, but he since asked about what we're asking the country to do this year, Mr. Speaker, which I think is, frankly, a more relevant consideration. The important thing to do, Mr. Speaker, is not only to follow the guidance which we have set out, but particularly, and I think this would be very valuable for everybody to hear, get your booster, Mr. Speaker.
Lively exchanges there at Prime Minister's Questions. Thank you for now. Sean will talk to you a little later because we're going to go to Holyrood and catch up with our correspondent there, David Wallace-Lockhart. Hello to you, David. We saw there in the headlines the SNP had their digital conference over the weekend. What did you make of it?
Well, it wasn't a typical conference speech from Nicola Sturgeon, not just because it was virtual, but also because there was a breaking news story that day, the Omicron variant of COVID detected in Scotland. Now, one SNP insider told me that the First Minister likes to have a lot of input into speeches like this, and there was a bit of frantic rewriting going on right up into the deadline, also an impromptu COVID briefing held that day. Now, the headlines, COVID aside, were a date for the doubling of the Scottish Child Payment, a devolved benefit here in Scotland, and also pledges that progress will be made to make an independence referendum a reality by 2023. But Nicola Sturgeon started off by addressing the COVID situation here in Scotland. No more restrictions at this point of time, but she did say there was one thing that everyone could do to try and keep the situation here under control.
Please, if you haven't done so already, get every dose of vaccine you are eligible for, including flu. I know there is a concern that the vaccines might be less effective against Omicron than against other variants. We don't know yet if that's the case. But even if it is, getting vaccinated will still matter. Less effective does not mean ineffective. The Scottish Child Payment currently provides low-income families with £10 per week for every child under age 6. Over 105,000 children are already benefiting. Next year it will be extended to all children in low-income families under the age of 16. Now, at the election, we committed to doubling the payment to £20 per child per week within this term of Parliament. Our cooperation agreement with the Greens committed us to achieving this as quickly as possible. I am very pleased, indeed proud, to announce today that our budget on the 9th of December will fund the doubling of the Scottish Child Payment immediately from the start of the new financial year. I defy anyone to look at the broken, corrupt, self-serving Westminster system that we are currently part of and conclude that it provides a secure basis for the future of Scotland. So I would not be discharging my duty to the people of Scotland if I did not seek to keep the promise on which we were elected, to offer the people of Scotland the choice of a better future through independence. Next year, COVID permitting, as we emerge from winter into spring, the campaign to persuade a majority of people in Scotland that our future will be more secure as an independent nation will resume in earnest. In the course of next year, I will initiate the process necessary to enable a referendum before the end of 2023.
Now, what remains unclear, however, is how exactly that referendum happens, because remember in 2014 that referendum had the approval of both Scottish and UK governments. They agreed it should happen. The UK government is not agreeing to a second one. Therefore, this could all yet end up in the courts.
David, Nicola Sturgeon, a moment ago, as we heard, was also talking about the vaccination programme. That was a topic that the Scottish Conservatives wanted to focus on at FMQs.
That's right, specifically the booster scheme. Like in England, the Scottish Government said it would enact recommendations from the JCVI to cut the time between the second dose and the booster from 6 months to 3 months. They announced that would happen, and that led to quite a few people booking their doses. You can do if you're over 40 in Scotland and going along to a vaccine centre. The problem is the actual guidance that had to get to health boards to enable vaccinators to enact that change in policy hadn't yet been received. That led to some people being turned away. Now, it was a fiery topic of discussion at First Minister's questions this week, and at one point Nicola Sturgeon pointed out she'd seen reports on Twitter of similar things happening in England. Now, I don't think she was trying to make that too big a point. She was just suggesting that it wasn't a Scotland-only problem, but the leader of the Scottish Conservatives, Douglas Ross, did not react kindly to that.
The First Minister had time to check Twitter to see what was happening in England rather than trying to solve the problems here in Scotland. Because while her apology is very welcome and her backbenchers are shouting it's solved, her and the Deputy First Minister are going along the same lines that this was all an issue yesterday. Yet we are still hearing this morning of people turning up on Thursday morning to get the vaccine that they had booked, and they were turned away.
Are we going as fast as we need to go? We've got to pick up that pace further. But actually, is the approach we are taking in Scotland right now the most successful anywhere in the UK? Yes. And isn't it about time? Douglas Ross, if he won't give the government, and I'm not asking him to give the government any credit, not just in rhetoric but in reality, gave these vaccinators working so hard right across the country the credit they deserve.
So certainly some teething problems this week to be observed, but the bigger question, the bigger challenge, I suppose, for the Scottish Government is meeting their pledge now of getting all adults who are eligible vaccinated with their booster by the end of January next year. That's the same target as the UK Government is holding itself to.
Yes, fiery exchanges there between Douglas Ross and Nicola Sturgeon. David, meanwhile, Scottish Labour have been raising concerns this week about what's been going on in a major Glasgow hospital.
Yeah, this has been quite a long-running campaign for Scottish Labour. It relates to the Queen Elizabeth University Hospital in Glasgow. That's the biggest hospital in Scotland, and it's the subject of a public inquiry at the moment after it emerged that patients had died from infections related to pigeon droppings and contaminated water supplies. And an earlier review had found that the hospital environment was at least in part to blame for the deaths of 2 children. Now, Scottish Labour alleged that the hospital environment has played a role in the deaths of 3 further children, and Anna Sarwar, the party leader, alleges there's a culture of, in his words, cover-up and secrecy at the Health Board, Greater Glasgow and Clyde. So in a debate this week, they called for a no-confidence vote in the leadership of that Health Board. The Health Board denies all of these allegations, but the Scottish Government said they want to let the review run its course. They say improvements have been made at the hospital in recent times and that staff continue to provide exceptional care. Here's some of that debate, which did get quite emotional at points.
Each and every single one of my colleagues and my backbench colleagues, or indeed my colleagues in government, and of course I include myself in this, I suspect we are all on the same side. The same side as Douglas Ross, the same side as Anna Sarwar, the same side as Alex Cole-Hamilton. Each and every single one of us wants the best, most safe patient experience for members of the public.
For the families watching the Parliament today,
this debate will have been a deeply upsetting experience. It will have brought back memories of loved ones, but it will have brought back anger towards those who covered up the truth from them. So we owe those families answers, and we owe them action. It is incumbent on all of us in this place to demonstrate that this Parliament will not stand by when NHS staff are being bullied and blamed, and we will not stand by when patients are being failed and lied to. How dare the Health Board and the Scottish Government use these hard-working staff as a human shield for their failures?
Now, MSPs voted against Scottish Labour's motion, but Scottish Labour aren't letting up on this issue. They brought it up again at First Minister's questions this week, and Nicola Sturgeon actually said if there are any clinicians within the Health Board who think there's any behaviour going on that should not be going on, they should come to her directly with that information. But she's saying that sacking the board of Scotland's biggest health board would do nothing at this point to improve the situation for patients. And like we say, the Health Board denies Scottish Labour's allegations. They released a letter this week from 23 senior clinicians who all work in that Greater Glasgow and Clyde Health Board, when they said that Scottish Labour's claims were unfounded and that they were worried that these reports and this issue being brought up time and time again by Scottish Labour would lead to an erosion of trust between clinicians, patients and families.
David, thank you very much. We'll leave Holyrood for now. Let's go back to Westminster. Here, Sean, with you. We saw in the headlines there was a motion from the SNP this week that could have resulted in the Prime Minister getting a pay cut. How did that actually come about?
So, on St Andrew's Day, the SNP got to choose the topic for debate, and they brought forward what's known as a censure motion. They criticised Boris Johnson's performance as Prime Minister, and they wanted to dock his pay. They also accused him of violating one of the principles of public life, which is honesty. And that led to a very interesting parliamentary moment, because there are very strict rules about what you can and cannot say in the House of Commons when you're talking about another MP. And it's completely forbidden to suggest that somebody is a liar. Now, because of the subject of this motion, there was a question mark about whether or not MPs could call the Prime Minister a liar. Over the years, of course, MPs have tried all sorts of formulas to get round this ban. I mean, the most famous one probably is one that Churchill coined more than 100 years ago when he accused somebody of a terminological inexactitude. But the Deputy Speaker, Eleanor Lang, said that because this focused on the conduct of one person and because of the way it was worded, the rules would be different for this one debate.
As Erskine May says, good temper and moderation are the characteristics of parliamentary language. And parliamentary language is never more desirable than when a member is canvassing the opinions and conduct of their opponents in debate.
Unless the Prime Minister faces consequences, unless he is censured, he won't just think that he's gotten away with the mess he's made over the last few months. He'll think he'll be able to do it over and over again. And let's be clear, if the Prime Minister isn't properly censured today, it will also be final proof that the Tories really do believe that it's one rule for them and one rule for everybody else.
Could I suggest that if he wishes to restore confidence in this House, could I politely suggest that he maybe could have chosen a subject for debate today that was actually of relevance to the people of Scotland?
Absolutely right.
Global warming, education, health, where so many issues not this rather lame subject, which I suspect is something of no consequence whatsoever to most people working very hard. Most people.
Does he appreciate, and do the members on the opposite side appreciate the damage that has been done when to be able to use the word liar in this place is now passed as fair comment? and accepted, and the damage that is doing to our democracy.
Order, order, let us just be clear about that. It is preferable that such words should not be used in this place.
The SNP motion today is pitiful politicking. And the people of Scotland, frankly, deserve better. And they want to see real solutions to real problems. And unfortunately, it's part of a pattern, Madam Deputy Speaker, with the SNP, that they put ideological purity ahead of the interests of the people of Scotland.
I thought we were doing them a favour. I thought they would all be queuing up, jumping over each other to get to their feet, to defend the Prime Minister, to tell us what a wonderful character he was, to tell us about all his attributes, to tell us he was the most honest man in the world, that he was corruption and sleaze free. None of them did it, not one.
He opts to launch pantomime season in the month of November, complete with an over-the-top characterisation of my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, who clearly he wishes would disappear in a puff of smoke. I venture that neither this House nor the people of this country will appreciate the over-the-top performance, nor recognise, I have to say, the absurd depiction of the Prime Minister, a hugely popular Prime Minister of this country, who returned this House with an 80-seat majority and is getting on with the job of building back better.
Obviously quite compelling contributions there from all sides of the House.
Yeah, it was a little bit of parliamentary panto, if you like, because obviously this was a political argument and it was pretty clear that there wasn't going to be a great consensus in terms of the opposite sides of the House. And to no one's great surprise, I mean, the Minister mentioned there that the government had a majority and the censure motion was rejected by 321 votes to 214. So Boris Johnson gets to keep his pay and he isn't censured. And then, interestingly, as a little follow-up on Thursday, Dame Eleanor Lang, the Deputy Speaker, made it quite clear to MPs that this little waiving of the rules about what they could and couldn't say was very specifically for that one day. Normally, if an MP calls another MP a liar or accuses somebody of lying, they are asked to withdraw the comment, and if they don't, they get thrown out. And she was making it very clear that there wasn't any kind of permanent change to the rules. It was really a one-off occasion for this censure motion debate.
A clear clarification from Eleanor Lang. Thank you for now, Sean. We're going to go over to the Senedd and catch up with our reporter there, Cemlyn Davies. Hello to you, Cemlyn. Plaid Cymru also had their conference over the weekend, and as you might expect, the dramatic deal they did last week, which we talked about with Labour, was a big topic. What happened?
Yes, that's right. This conference taking place at the end of a big week for Plaid Cymru, a week in which they struck that deal with the Welsh Labour government to work together on dozens of policy commitments over the next 3 years. But crucially, for the deal to go ahead, it needed the backing of Plaid Cymru's membership. And so, in his pre-recorded speech that was played out during the conference, well, Adam Price really made an effort to sell this agreement to the Plaid membership, to make the case for it. He said it would change thousands of lives across Wales, that it represented a nation-building programme for government, and that it was a down payment on independence. Let's hear a bit of that speech.
For Wales to be free, we must first be united. And that is what this cooperation agreement sets out to achieve. It launches us on a pathway to a united Wales, one that sooner than perhaps we think will find it both comfortable and natural, indeed essential, to join the world community of normal, independent nations. As I said this week on the Senedd steps, if passed tomorrow, the cooperation agreement is set to start on the first day of winter. Through it, we will plant together the seed beneath the snow of a new society, a new Wales, a new beginning.
Adam Price's speech there played out during the conference last Friday, and then on Saturday, well, Plaid's membership did overwhelmingly back this deal when they voted on it at the conference. And so this cooperation agreement came into force on Wednesday, on the 1st of December, when it was signed by the First Minister, Mark Drakeford, and Plaid Cymru's leader, Adam Price.
And the cooperation agreement was obviously passed and signed off in that sense. It was also debated in the Parliament this week.
Yes, that's right, and it's led to all sorts of legal and constitutional questions here, particularly around what Plaid Cymru's role is now. Are they part of the government? Do they have an executive role? And if so, should that have an impact on some of their other parliamentary privileges? So lots of technical questions being asked here as a result of this new type of cooperation agreement. The concern from the Conservatives and a couple of Labour backbenchers is that this will undermine the work of the Parliament in scrutinising the government, because even though Plaid Cymru won't have ministers as part of this deal, they will be involved in some of the government's work. So all this was debated here on Wednesday afternoon.
This agreement says that the involvement of Plaid Cymru is recognised as part of normal government communications. And as such, this is a coalition in everything but name. And so why won't the Welsh Government just come clean with the people of Wales and call it for what it is, a coalition?
This is not a coalition, it is a cooperation agreement. And if you look back at the last 22 years of the Senedd and prior to that the Assembly, every Assembly since we've had devolution 22 years ago has involved a partnership arrangement of some sort. Now, we haven't had a cooperation agreement before, but we do see many different arrangements right across the world. This is not novel. It's different to what we've had before, but it's certainly not normal. And we absolutely have a history of working collaboratively for the benefit of the people of Wales.
This does raise questions for us as a parliament, and I don't believe that the government can wipe that under any carpet and pretend it doesn't exist. The government is already too powerful in this chamber. It is powerful and it does not receive the same scrutiny as other governments receive, either in Westminster or Holyrood or even in Stormont. So there are questions here, because Plaid Cymru will have a role which goes beyond that of simply a budget agreement that we have experienced before.
Well, the Llywydd, the Senate's presiding officer, Elin Jones, also gave a statement on this on Wednesday. She said that in her view, Plaid Cymru won't have an executive role due to the fact that they won't have ministers. But she did acknowledge as well that there are still issues and questions that need to be resolved around this. So I'm sure this is a row that will continue to unfold.
Cameron, we've been talking about the impact of the Omicron variant, this new COVID-19 variant, because it's a big issue in all parts of the UK. The Welsh Government has been setting out how it's going to respond. What have they said?
Yes, that's right. And already we've seen a tightening of the rules here in Wales around self-isolation, including for fully vaccinated people. Action being taken in schools as well. So already in secondary schools now, students are being asked to wear face coverings in the classroom as well as in communal areas. And then, of course, there's been much focus this week on what's happening with the booster programme here and trying to roll out that programme as quickly as possible, and the Health Minister, Lyned Morgan, gave an update on this on Tuesday.
We are accelerating the programme very rapidly. We did have a target to try and reach all of those who were under 50 by the new year. We are going to try and supercharge the whole process as much as possible. We'll hopefully be able to give a bit more detail in the next week or so in terms of what our plans look like and what the expectations should be there. But as I say, only 6 days so far, and I can assure you that our teams have been working all weekend on this already.
Eluned Morgan there, and she also said that firefighters and the army could be called in to help to ramp up this vaccination programme over the coming weeks and months, along with a jabs army, as she put it, of volunteers.
Kemlyn Davis talking to us there from the Senedd. Thank you very much. Let's go over to Stormont and find out what's happening there with Jim Fitzpatrick. Jim, let's talk about the Omicron variant with you too, as we have done with Kemlyn in Wales, and what the response has been there in Northern Ireland.
Well, the Health Minister, Joe Robin-Swan, was in the chamber this week outlining what he felt needed to be done. It's hard for him to be specific because he needs to get agreement across the executive with all the parties, but he did talk about new restrictions perhaps on travel and new restrictions when people come back. But what we've seen this week is an increase in those booster jabs, or more clinics being open, the age limit changing as we've seen elsewhere in the UK. So there is a combined effort on that front. Where there's controversy though still in dealing with the pandemic is not over what to do about the boosters, it's about COVID certification. That was passed, as we discussed before, at the executive. It's now in place in hospitality. If you go into a pub or a restaurant, you're asked to show your COVID cert. It won't be enforced legally for another couple of weeks, but the DUP that opposed this policy are still arguing, if you like, against the concept, although they didn't use their veto at the executive to stop it entirely. And the First Minister, Paul Givan, would rather see more effort in terms of vaccination. But he was challenged in the Assembly this week by the chair of the Health Committee, Colin Gildernew of Sinn Féin, who was challenging the First Minister about some in the DUP who are vaccine sceptics, and therefore this apparent mixed messaging that we've had.
Minister, we are still in the midst of an ongoing and an unprecedented health crisis and potentially facing a very difficult winter that threatens to pile more pressure on an already beleaguered health and social care system. Maintaining a strong public health messaging will be crucial to protecting our healthcare service in the time ahead. So can the First Minister give a commitment that we will see no more intemperate or ill-judged outbursts from outliers in his party who seem determined to undermine the public health messaging?
Well, Mr Speaker, it is important that the executive does the right things and focuses its energy and efforts in those measures that will have real, tangible benefits, and that's why I continue to advocate for people who haven't been vaccinated to take up the vaccine, for those that haven't received their booster jab to take the booster jab. We announced collectively a re-emphasis of that important messaging whenever it comes to personal responsibility and actions that we can all take. But in respect of the issue to do with mandatory COVID certification processes, this was a politically driven decision. It was not evidence-based, and that is what has brought the executive into controversy. And I warned at the time that we shouldn't be engaging in divisive and distractive policies, but that we should be focusing on those measures that actually will see real benefits. And whenever I think about this particular issue around COVID certification, instead of a thought-out, orderly plan to make this happen, there has been a last-minute scramble from the parties in government, and they are producing legislation to be rushed through this week, which is discriminatory, which is ill thought out, and which many will regard as unenforceable. Not my words, but the words of Mary Lou McDonald.
Well, the DUP First Minister there quoting the Sinn Féin President, Mary Lou McDonald, who of course is in opposition in the Republic of Ireland, and those were words apparently she used in relation to the government's policy there on vaccine certification. So I suppose he was giving back to Colin Gildernew, saying, if you're accusing us of some mixed messaging, well, look at your own house too.
Well, Jim, aside from Omicron and COVID generally, the cost of living and particularly energy bills have also been discussed in the Assembly this week. What was that all about?
Well, we're all very aware of rising energy costs and, of course, an issue that affects Northern Ireland too. The Northern Ireland Consumer Council has estimated that families here will face probably an extra £1,000 this year in spending on energy to heat their homes. So we had the Communities Minister, Deirdre Hargey, outlining what she wants to do about it, and because of fuel poverty here, she would like to help those who are in most need. And what essentially she was doing in the chamber was coming with an idea idea rather than detailed proposals, but saying that she wanted to take hold of money that was coming from the Treasury to Northern Ireland and guarantee it for her and for a one-off payment that she will give to those who need it most. And essentially we talked about Barnett consequentials. This essentially is the formula by which the Treasury doles out money to the rest of the UK, and she says she wants a certain chunk of that to come straight to her for this project.
I've written to the Minister for Finance to request that the 13.8 million of the Barnett consequential funding supporting households over the winter is allocated to my department to progress an energy payment support scheme. And in order to provide the necessary support for families who will need it over the winter period, an even greater amount will be required, and I welcome the Finance Minister's request to other executive colleagues in seeking additional funding to support this scheme going forward.
The Finance Minister is Conor Murphy and is indeed in the same party. So they will need executive approval, they will need to come up with some detailed proposals, and they'll need legislation before that can be put into action.
Jim Fitzpatrick at Stormont, thank you very much. Let's return to Westminster and you, Sean Curran, because this week the Lords have been looking at a recent report into how football should be regulated and how the fans could be more involved. Tell us about it.
Yep, this was a review into the way English football is run, and it was led by the Conservative MP and former Sports Minister Tracy Crouch. And it was set up in the wake of that botched attempt, perhaps that's the politest way to describe it, to set up the European Super League when these top clubs were going to break away. I think botched is probably as polite as we can get. Now, Tracy Crouch has come back with a series of recommendations. She'd like to see a new regulator set up. She'd like to see a change to the ownership rules. But as you say, the big thing is that she wants to get a system set up that will give fans a much bigger say in the way their clubs are run. And this week, the Lords got the opportunity to talk through Tracy Crouch's proposals.
We strongly welcome the independent Crouch review, whose recommendations, I have to say, look suspiciously like the sports section of Labour Party manifestos going back several general elections. We've long called for fans to be placed at the centre of the game they do so much to sustain, and for stronger protections when they are mistreated or their beloved clubs mismanaged.
I'm very proud that our manifesto commitment to set up this review has led to it in swift time, and Tracy Crouch, as I say, has done very thorough work at good speed. We will do her report and the views of all the fans that contributed to it, the respect that it deserves to go through. It deserves a substantive response from the government, and it will get it.
Some of us have been saying for more than 20 years, a lot longer than 20 years actually, that too much of our football governance is not fit for purpose, that the drive for the Premier League for more and more and more money has actually undermined much of what football is meant to be about.
There aren't many things that England leads the world at, but the Premier League is one of them. And one of the reasons for that is because it's attracted investment from right around the world. Is the Minister not aware that the Premier League gave £250 million to the Championship and millions more to the leagues below that? And one of the reasons it was able to do that is because the league has been so successful. So let's be cautious about undermining that.
Well, unsurprisingly, and quite rightly, a lot of interest in the House of Lords and in Parliament on this issue of football and regulation. When might the government come forward with their proposals?
Well, the government have said they will respond by the spring of 2022, but as everybody in Westminster knows, when governments talk about seasons like this, they can be quite flexible. The key thing is that if these regulations are going to come into effect, there's probably going to need to be a change in the law. And so that will require some time, and it'll have to be debated in a lot of detail by the Commons and the Lords. Now, Tracy Crouch has said she hopes that the new independent regulator could be set up and running by the start of the new season in 2023. So that'll be the 23-24 season. And that obviously does imply that there would be a fairly swift response and that the laws would go through Parliament pretty quickly before then.
Sean Curran, thank you very much. Well, if it's been a busy week this week in Parliament, we're expecting it to be even busier next week. But that's all from us today. I will be back on Monday with Politics Live. Until then, from all of us here, have a very good weekend.